This is Neil King for Random Acts of Cartooning, and I'm about to draw a samurai Batman. But first... Okay, everyone, so today's influence for this episode is Batman Black and White. Now, I have a few samples of this. I have separate copies, and I've missed a few of them. So this one I thought I would show first to just kind of give people an idea. I'm sure this is a compilation of a few issues. I'm not sure if they did this all as a volume, but to start off with, Mike Mignola in this cover, beautiful. This is what the Batman Black and White is about. He's taking this great icon and seeing it in different ways. So the way I think of the way I do Batman, I do them differently all the time, is I think about this Batman Black and White. So they start off with this issue with a little Alex Ross, and I have some other Batman stuff of his. He does beautiful work as always. But the traditional kind of way that you think about his history, it's a good way to start this episode with beautiful images, hyperrealism. And he just does such a great job with the characters that you believe them. It's almost like a storyboard. And then he's going into different styles, these much more cartoony styles, which I think this is cool. And this specific episode, I liked a few different ones. And when I see them, what I like most about them is that, like this is Steve Rude. Again, very different take on it. But it's, I really like it. And, there's so many big names here. Tim Sale, I like all of his work. I think some styles just work better with Batman. Tim Sale's more similar to myself. I don't think he's a traditional kind of cartoonist. He's not somebody that you would see in a monthly book, it seems like. But he has such a great feel for the medium. And again, lots of styles here. I think this is a John Byrne one, which is almost for kids. And I think Byrne may have wanted that for this style. I could see this being colored, where when it's black and white like this, I don't think it's as successful. But he really has certain ones where he's such a great storyteller. But it's for kids. But Paul Pope, he did a book, and I think I may have shown it already. But I love his Batman. This is the way I would draw him. You get the sense of it. Great action. I love, everybody loves Paul Pope. But I think there's a bunch of other ones that I think are pretty nice, like weirdly, like this is, I think, John Buscema. And I don't think this is as successful. He can do, he does so many great things, but I don't know. I don't think it lends that much to him. I'd rather see his Conan. But lots of different styles. And it's a great book. This is like my favorite one, I think, in the book. I thought this was Bruce Timm. But it's not. But it's, look at this artwork. And this is the problem. And this is kind of how I like my line work and storytelling. A little more cartoony, but lots of great characterizations, great images. And it just brings you through. You barely see Batman, but he's in there pretty quickly. But it's a beautiful book, and this is kind of why I'm doing this series also for my episodes of Batman images. Get this one. All right, so what I'm embarking on is drawing on these three separate 11 by 17 watercolor paper, where I went to a copy shop and I just got the logos, three different logos on the top. So I'm looking at these three separate images, and I'm going to draw 3 different variations of Batman. So for comic conventions, I get these all the time. People come up to me and they have the actual sized comics with a blank cover. And I did a commission recently where someone was asking me if I could do something like that, but actually at size. So this is an 11 by 17, like I say, and it's my paper. It's about 100-pound paper. And I can do all my stuff on it. I can do my watercolors and my brushes on it. So I'm jumping in here and just getting some pencils down. And I've done an image like this before with Batman at one of the conventions. It was years ago. But I like the idea of the thing about Batman that they've done over the last bunch of years is that they put him in all kinds of different positions and variations of the characters. Some of them obviously must start with the basic mythology, and then they'll put him in some other situations. So I really like that idea, and I think Marvel does the same thing sometimes with some of the characters. So between Batman and Superman, they have them in all kinds of different limited series when they do these things. So for me, I just wanted to get this kind of samurai idea of him. So his armor would have something to do with the Batman ideas, but then just go into a direction as I tend to like to do when I'm drawing things at a convention. So the graphic design part of this is something that you have to be aware of because you want to try to make it work with the logo, and that's kind of how I kind of dealt with this. So I've got him into a position where I can see the sword, and he's got, tries to make him menacing and all that stuff. And now I try to go in there and I'm working on some of the details of this helmet. So I like the idea of, everything that Batman has, he has the logo, and it's going to be somewhere on everything, whether it's on the side of the car or, on whatever, all the things that Batman has, weapons and everything, they tend to have a bat in some way, shape, or form on them. So I tried to, I looked up a bunch of samurai armor, and so I'm trying to, do that hybrid feeling of what I think they would do with the character if they put him into a samurai kind of a situation. So it all kind of works out in the end, and there's a bunch of things I would think you could do with the character, with some of the warlike things that you can do with a samurai kind of culture thing. So I'm just going in there with my basic fountain pen, and I get the biggest amount of detail that I would put on something like this. So I'm just kind of going in and roughing this in, because the whole thing with my style is I want to have a certain amount of detail, but really what I'm more interested in is getting in there with my brushes, my brush pens, and really kind of staying loose and having fun with it. So just trying to get the hands in there and a basic kind of samurai move. When you're doing these kind of things for conventions or anything, people, you kind of want to have the character that you can kind of see the most from of the uniform that they're wearing. So so to me, I had to make sure that I could see the chest plate, so you can see the big bat on the middle of the chest plate. And then once that's there, then you can kind of go in another direction. So now I've gone in with the next size up of my brush pens, and this one I'm just trying to get that kind of metallic feeling with the character. Now, obviously, if I was going to be the artist for this specific story, I feel like I would do a whole bunch of other things with the background, maybe add a little bit more to it. But this is to me a Comic-Con sketch that that I want to spend as much time with this in my studio as I would if I was at a convention and someone had asked me for something like this. So I try to keep these types of sketches, they shouldn't take me more than about 20 minutes to a half an hour. And because you really do, if you're going to do the convention stuff, you gotta, if you're going to do what I'm doing, which is just going in and drawing all day, you have to be able to just, make an impression of what you're trying to do and then just kind of move on. So I have a bunch of ideas for this kind of thing. Like, it comes back to all the things that you've ever seen. Like I always think of when I see this kind of armor, it always reminds me of how, like right now, like a John Romita Jr. would do it. But of course, like he comes from that whole, the playoff of what the Kirby stuff is, but everybody comes off of that. But when I think of these things, I tend to think of trying to get big shapes in, and once the big shapes are in, then you can add some of your detail onto it. Because again, I know I'm going to come in with a brush later and really add a whole lot of shine and of shadow and all that kind of stuff. So things don't have to be super tight. So again, like this kind of brush stroke is one that I get when I'm using my brush pen. I really like the dry brush feel to some of the edges, and you can get a variety of textures when you do it. And it's just, it's all about feel and all about trying to be dynamic with your brush. So I'm going in, I'm going thick and thin with the lines, and just trying to get him in there to look like some kind of a typical warrior that you would see. And I'm adding flourishes and things that I think would remind you that he's Batman and he's not just some type of armored warrior of some form, because you could definitely feel that way. And I'm the biggest advocate of as little bit of, with this kind of stuff, as little of the reality of what would happen with all the different colors and things. I really try to keep it limited when I'm doing this kind of work. And I always think that whenever I do these kind of things, the strength of these drawings really comes down to me keeping within the character of the stuff that I do. So I know when I'm squinting my eyes and I look at, I'm looking to see the contrast. Sometimes, like I'm doing here, I have to beef up some line because to me maybe it's just a little too thin and it's not working. But my experience shows that when I do this kind of stuff, that eventually when I do come in with the watercolor and everything, I'm going to be getting rid of a lot of areas. Like the detail just doesn't have to be too much because I could very well just go over it and you wouldn't even see what I was trying to do with that kind of stuff. So that's where I am at this point. So I'm just really kind of going aggressively into all the parts and making sure there's enough darks and that it reads. So I have a little bit of a background. Maybe I'll do a little bit of, something in the front. I'm sure it'll be hazy. But to me, like, these are the kind of marks that you make that I would see in like a lot of different types of Chinese landscapes and all kinds of different things that I think of which I really love. So for this, I want to make sure that it's there, it's present, and you get a sense of the simplicity of the line, but it gives a lot of character to everything that comes in front of it. So I'm getting pretty close to where I feel like I have to be with just the line, and I'm going to go in with the color after this. But you can see lots of marks, thin, thick. It's fun. Hey everyone, as always, I always remind everyone that I am a working cartoonist. So the whole point of doing my episodes is to get everybody to go to my Amazon store and buy a bunch of the books that I make. So I have all kinds of different types of books, whether it's for all ages, like Who Stole All the Heads at the Met, and all kinds of books like this, Snowmen in the Springtime, fun contemplation of what would happen if snowmen survived into the spring. And then these are some older ones that I really think a lot of kids would like. Monsters in the Box. There's 4 different books that are collected in here. You get all this on Amazon. I have all the links in the episode. And as always, I'm here doing my sketches. I do conventions and everything, and I do all kinds of commissions. So these are the kinds of pieces that I do. So always contact me about that, or look for me at some of the local conventions that you're involved in. But make sure you're liking and subscribing. Okay, so it's time for some color. So I'm just getting my semi-moist watercolor set there. Not the most expensive, pretty inexpensive Prang, which I just really love them, and they're very affordable, and I get what I want from using them. They're so portable. I can bring them around all over the place. So I'm going to go into this first one with all kind of a warm color feel for this. I could with Batman, if you think about him, he's a cool color character. He's got the blues and grays, and those to me, even the grays are more of a cool color. So I thought I would go away from that and stick to just reds first. So I'm going to use a little yellow also for some parts, but mostly I'm going to go in there and just kind of go in there. So if you know what you tend to do with watercolors, you want to go from light to dark, and you want to build it. So with the character at this point, you're just getting this sense, I hope that you can see that it's metallic, that's on, metal that I'm bringing over there, and lots of panels and everything that are going along for the arms and the shoulders and all that stuff. But at first, whenever I'm doing this, you just want to establish a light and a medium first, and then as you keep progressing, you'll go darker and darker as you go on. This is a wet on dry piece, and even though this is 100 pounds, you really can't. If I went in and tried to use it with a real wet on wet, I could really. I don't know if this paper would hold up as well. Like it does well with certain things that you do. Like I think a wet on dry, this kind of multimedia watercolor paper is just fine. And I have to, if I want to do these logos on this kind of paper, I have to be aware that most places are not going to allow me to put a very heavy paper that's 11 by 17 into their printers, so into the copiers, that is. So I'm really just kind of going with it, and I think that it does have a nice effect. So again, I'm just getting atmosphere at this point because I do want the character to pop out. And if you lay in some of these lights and mediums, you're starting to get on that idea. I start to get into the flow of what I'm trying to project here. So I thought it would be good in parts of this to maybe even color in some of the Batman logo also. And as I progress with this, I'll just keep touching up with that kind of stuff. But to me, like when I'm looking at this, I'm like, all right, I got to make sure that the sword is popping, and he's kind of coming out and all that stuff. Maybe there's kind of a nice kind of a haze around him. And you can see I'm just kind of laying all that in, not knowing exactly how far I want to go with it, and how much, once I go in with some blacks and grays, it's going to change this whole thing. But to me, like, I'm trying to get at certain strokes, that dry brush stroke that I prefer with most of the things that I do, especially for convention sketches. If this was obvious, I do way different stuff if it's kid stuff and it's supposed to be nice and clean. And this, my technique tends to be really aggressive with the adult-oriented stuff. So this would be someone who doesn't want like a little kid version. I don't think this is something a little, somebody, a younger fan wouldn't want. I would think this is not something that's very scary. But to me, it's more serious than some of the other things that I've done for different fans of different genres. And I would keep less of this kind of contrast if it was a kid's stuff. I tend to keep them pretty nice and clear, and I do plenty of commissions for that kind of stuff. But anyway, so I'm just kind of laying in a value into this logo, because I don't want it to just be up there by itself. So I'll go after it a little bit later, but I'm just kind of establishing that it's there, and that I'm working around it, just like you would have any regular cover that would have Batman on it. The logo kind of interacts with the design, so you have to be aware of it. And for me, I'm a graphic designer, so I really enjoy trying to figure out what's the best way to have a character who's got a sword, and you have this big logo up on the top, and it's an 11 by 17 format. What do you do with all this stuff to make it seem as much like a real cover as you can? So I'm just kind of moving in, and at this point I'm putting a little yellow in. I'm not going to make it all just red, the value, one monochromatic piece. I thought I would put a little yellow in, and once you do that, you want to move around and put a little bit like throughout the design. So it's not just like that's the part of his helmet or maybe a part of the sword. You want to get a little yellow in there with the other parts, especially with metal, because you would have some kind of reflection, I'm sure, of any color that was around. But for me, for trying to come in and make it dynamic, you want to just use a little bit. You don't just pop it in one place. You want to use it throughout the piece, and I think it makes it seem a little more realistic that way. Even with a very crazier looking kind of a piece like this, doesn't have it's not heavily based on reality, but there's enough reality that you can pick it all out. So now I'm going to get to the last phase here, which is kind of coming in with the dark areas. So up to this point, mostly I have like a light and a medium reds, with some parts with a little bit of a darker red, but not that many. And then I come in with the black and grays, and this is where the real contrasts are going to happen throughout this entire piece. So helmet stuff, and now it's just, you have to move around. Like, you might start in this area, and I want to bring that yellow down a little bit, so I'm adding a little black to the yellow, make it seem a little more metallic, and then I want him to pop out from that background, and so that there's no doubt that the viewer is looking right at him and not getting caught up in behind him. And this is where, like, when you're doing a little bit of a background, you want it to be there, but like I say, it's not gonna take too much attention away from the character in the front. So even at this stage, I always feel like, am I going too light or am I going too dark? and it's just going, I'm going to make my way through. I want to keep the light source up there on coming down from the left-hand side so that there's some highlights on that armor. But past that, then I'm just going dark. And I'll just keep going in and building it as much as I can. The good thing about working with watercolor is it can be very loose and slowly gets tightened up as you go through, as long as you're working in that light to dark, because you kind of can't go back unless you want to paint on top of it. So with this, I'm always very happy when I see a good contrasty area and then it's working for me, because again, I'm working pretty aggressively, and you can blow out some of the areas if you're not careful. Stuff that you would be like, oh, maybe I should have kept that in, or should this have been lighter or darker, and But I tell everybody I've ever worked with, students and everything, just to keep squinting your eyes and looking for contrast, and it's so much easier when you do that. And I'll say to myself, I'm like, this whole background, is this too much? Is it too little? And then you're just going back and forth. And you get a little dry brush feel. I like the idea of this kind of storminess in the back. But you can see it's all the major stuff is in, but this really pops this whole image. He's so much more interesting to me when you add some of this big dark area around it, instead of allowing it just to be by itself and one value. You have to be able to show your values and make sure that the viewer understands what's going on here. I keep thinking, I mean, when I do this too, it does remind me of a lot of Chinese landscape artists, how they worked, and it's a free-flowing thing, and if you do it enough, you know what you want. And for me, I'm just like trying to make sure it's consistent. I'm adding things, I'm taking it away. But you can see, like, you want that leg to seem like it's going back, or one leg's coming in front of the other and it's moving towards us. But if you don't get the next darkest area, then it's just too similar, and you don't get a really great sense of where the character is. So I'm going to very aggressively up in the front put some type of thing like a rock or something he's coming up to, and then it just seems more like he's there. You get right up to those tops, and I'll start fighting it eventually. For me, there's whenever I'm doing this kind of work, it definitely gets to a place that you're like, all right, is it doing what I want? Am I doing too little? Am I doing too much? Have I already blown out too much of the image? Or am I not being aggressive enough and getting a feel for it? Because again, because the armor, there's so many lines, I think it's difficult. He can get lost inside that background. So I keep coming darker and darker on the background, so you see him, and he's really popping. Because at first I'm like, I think I'll be okay. There's not that much I should do to that background. But then I look at the helmet and I'm like, maybe I should do something a little darker back there and have that helmet pop out a little bit more. And it can make for an interesting kind of a cloud, when you do this. But it's me just saying, I'll bring it in a little bit more, and now his head seems like it's coming up a little bit more. And then I'm getting more and more interest in the background to make it seem like it works with the line. So you can see with the Batman logo up there, it's there, and you want it to work. But for me, like I'm like, oh, I kind of like that cloud. Maybe I'll just move it across and behind him, and that's kind of where I went with this. And all the highlights now on the helmet, because there's enough contrast, it'll pop a little bit better. There's a reflection going on there from where I'm working, so it looks very wet. But again, I want it to be consistent, and that's where I'm working there now. Adding a little bit up top, not too much. And just pushing the background back. I keep, again, like I feel like at this stage I'm just like, I don't want it to all just be dark. But once you kind of start with something, you kind of have to walk through that door and finish it. So for me, like, this is really pretty close, but then I see too much white, and I'm like, maybe I should just blow that out, because the white you kind of want to see on the armor. So if I allow too much white to happen, I think that the viewer is just automatically not able to focus in on what I'm doing. So I think it becomes a little more of a landscape in the back once I do some of that also. But I like in the front where you're seeing little bits of white. It gives a sense of reflection and, like, to me, like a haze that I think looks nice in a sketch like this. Like most people, when they do sketches that I've seen, they just don't handle it like this. And I do like all of them. Like so many great pros, they'll just do a nice image for a sketch. But I find myself, once I get started, I just have to get it to this place where I feel like it's done. And that's the fight, when to walk away. And it's so hard to walk away from it sometimes. Because you feel like, and I feel like in this place, I really am, I'm being a little bit too much aggressive, but I do like what's happening. Especially but you can see here too that's why you can't do too much of a detail when you're coming in with this much watercolor. I just don't believe it's worth it for what I'm doing here. Again, to me, like, this is the whole part. Dry brush, deeper, looking for that contrast. And when you make marks like this, sometimes you're just so happy you'll get a splatter feel, or there'll be a really nice gradation that you weren't aware of at first, and you're like, oh, I think that's pretty nice. And I think at the end, I tend to go in with a marker just to finish it, because it's hard like this. Like, I'm just like, I got to go in and reestablish some line here, because it can get really beaten up. And if I feel like there's too much texture, it gets in the way, and I'd rather that not happen. So having a broader line can really do a big thing for you. So I'm just going in again at the very end and establishing that line a little stronger in places. But I think it has a real feel. I feel like it's a pretty successful. And so again, this is like the first one. I'm going to do 3. So the next one, I have a couple ideas. But I'm going to maybe make one the most traditional Batman, and then but this is kind of a good place to start, where you don't see much of Batman in him, but he's there, but it's so different than what you would be used to seeing with him. But that's what's interesting. I feel like with these stories that they make, they should do way more of this kind of stuff. But I know they do a lot. So if you follow comics still, they're still doing these kind of stories. So anyway, I'm coming down to the end of this. As always, thanks for viewing this, and make sure you're subscribing and sharing with friends. I want to try to get my followers more and more interested in the things I'm doing, so I need many more. Thanks for sharing your time with me.